I'm Jude Bennett. I'm the Environment Agency Peatland team leader, and some of my team are here today. Unfortunately, Catherine Birdsall can't be with us, who she was supposed to be helping us leading this session, but she's unfortunately ill. But yeah, so and we've also got Amy Shaw, so from the local team down here to talk to you as well. So I think it's really clear over the last few days that, you know, sort of protecting carbon and in peatland soils is all about water. You know, water is key, and obviously from the Environment Agency's perspective, we are in that sort of understanding and taking that role forward. So land and water managers, including the Environment Agency, have got an incomplete understanding. I know there's a lot of knowledge out there, but we really need to be able to pull that together and understand more what the gaps are and what we need to be able to take things forward to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but making sure that we're balancing that farming and, you know, the other associated land uses and restoration where possible. So this workshop will hopefully draw out some of those big challenges. You know, management on a different variety of scales, from you know, sort of locally based to landscape based. So what we want to do is try and tease out some of those unanswered research questions to help us with our understanding. So the session, right. So this is what's going to happen in the next few hours. We've got some talks. Amy Shaw's going to talk to us about things 2100 plus. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
So, and then Emma's going to talk to us a little bit about the research and development project and permitting. So that's I'll be handing over to you two in a moment. But then after that, we've got some activities to try and sort of tease out some of your ideas and your understanding and just sort of share ideas as much as we can. So we're going to have an individual session where we can identify your challenges, you know, your issues and concerns, and then we'll split into two workshops. So what are the challenges, and then actually go into a little bit more detail on how do we address those and how, you know, how people see what options we have available. So, and then we'll just do a quick summary at the end of that. So, I'm going to hand over to Amy now to give some of the detail on FENS 2100. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, I'm Amy Shaw. I am the flood risk manager for the FENS, the Environment Agency. So, I cover the Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire FENS, the Environment Agency, and I sit in our operational team. So, and my role is essentially trying to determine what our future investment approach is for flood risk management across that FENS landscape, which is no small task in a landscape which is massively managed and is it's a highly managed landscape, and there are hundreds and hundreds of assets. So when I talk about assets, we're talking about pumping stations, sluices, culverts, raised defences, owned by both us as the Environment Agency, but also owned and managed by IDBs, and also owned and managed by riparian owners, so landowners themselves. So we've got a huge range of assets across this landscape, and they all cost money. They all are, but they are all doing an incredibly important job across this landscape to enable this landscape to be a place where we can actually live and work and run viable businesses. So I just wanted to, I guess, give you a bit of a picture as to where I'm sitting as a manager and an operator within this landscape, and I guess just try and give a bit of a picture as to how I view the challenge. I'm also listening to all of the conversation that I've had over the past few days about peat restoration and just sort of set out what I'm seeing as how I see that might fit in with this wider challenge of floodplain management across the landscape. So just, I know we've obviously been out in the fens, but I know that there's a lot of people who are not potentially haven't had that much involvement in Lowland fens. So just to go back to, I guess, some of the facts and figures. So Lowland is being eroded through drainage and cultivation at a rate of about 2 centimetres a year across the fens, and we estimate there's about 10,500 hectares of peat deeper than 1 metre, and a quarter is located in nature reserves or flood-free washlands. So we think the peat wastage is estimated about 3.8. The Fens is the largest contiguous area of lowland peat in the UK, and the Cambridge peatlands account for about 70% of the wasted peatland in the country. The carbon impacts and operations and maintenance across the Fens is an order of 13,000 tonnes. And we've obviously talked about things like polluter. So that's the, I guess, the lowland peat agenda, or the peatland picture across the Fens. But where I'm more comfortable, as you can probably tell, is in the asset management space. So just taking it back to basics, so the Fens is an entirely unnatural landscape. It is a landscape which was drained back in the 1600s and was drained in order to produce and provide agricultural land. So it's a system which has been set up to be drained and to produce food for a very, very long time. The entire system is managed in that way to enable us to do that. It means that we have ended up with a very, very complex system of asset management. We have across the Cambridge and Lincolnshire Fens about 450 pumping stations, about 5,000 kilometres of defences, and hundreds and hundreds of other structures. So we have an entire system which is managed, and that management approach is water management is happening daily. So when we talk about flood risk management in a lot of places, people are talking about those big defences which often come into play when we have large storms. But actually in the Fens, it's much more of a water level management approach rather than a flood risk management approach. And we are, ourselves and IDBs and landowners are all managing water daily in order to keep this as a landscape which is viable to live and to work. So we have a very, very large complex landscape. We have many organisations. So we are made up of a very large number of responsible authorities. So we have a mixture of IDBs, Environment Agency, local authorities. We also have landowners. We've also got a set of assets which were predominantly put in place in about the 1950s, or some of them. So we've got a lot of assets which were put in at a very similar time and are now actually all starting to come to the end of their design life. So it's quite an ageing infrastructure as a whole. We've got assets which were designed for a purpose, which are to drain that land. That was the primary reason, and that which means that they are all set up to do that one job. We've got pockets of strategy and pockets of collaboration. So we've got individual areas where we started to focus on the future, but actually across that whole landscape we haven't got a single sort of focused approach to how we're going to be approaching to the future. And we've got some really uncomfortable truths in terms of flood risk management. So the current funding mechanism for flood risk management is not really very well set up for the Fens landscape. So we are driven by government rules, funding rules, and those funding rules are primarily driven towards protecting people and property. That is what we can spend flood risk management money on. That doesn't work very well in the Fens, where you have very large areas, very, very complex, expensive assets, but fewer people and property. So that means into the future, it's going to be, investment challenge is going to be quite difficult. We've also got a highly carbon intensive system. So it is a pump system, it is reliant on carbon. And it is a system that really we're going to need to continue maintaining at some level. So we're in quite a challenging situation from a flood risk management point of view. And just go back, so just to reiterate, so this is, I guess, a picture of what we used to have in the Fens. And this is, so we've done some work with the Environment Agency to determine what the assets that are in the Fens are delivering. So what are the benefits and the costs of those assets? And this map shows you what would happen if, and I'm not saying in any shape or form we are doing this, if we were to stop doing what we're doing now in terms of flood risk management. This is the level of inundation you would get across the Fens. So it is not, we're not talking about getting your feet wet, we're talking about up to 2.5 metres of permanent inundation across the Fens over the next 7 to 12 years if we were to stop doing everything now. So this is trying to show the value that those assets deliver and the fact that this system will need to continue to be managed in some shape or some form through our flood risk management assets in the future, because the level of inundation and the level of impact on businesses, people and property is huge if we don't continue to manage at some level.
Excuse me, Amy. Sorry, is that inundation from the sea or from rain events, storm events?
So because the Fens are below sea level, the majority of them, our system is essentially pumping so any rainfall that falls in the catchment is coming into the Fens, and then there's a series of assets are pumping it out of the system, so out to sea. So it's essentially, if we stop doing what we're doing, all of that rain would just come and would just sit on the land and slowly inundate that land over time. So that's not taking into account what would happen with the sea level rise. So that's what basically, that water is what we are pumping out.
So it's fresh water?
It's fresh water that is being pumped out of the system continually through the asset management that we do jointly as asset management together. But it is costly. So we know that it is likely that if we were to continue, that we're looking at about £1.6 billion worth of costs going forward to maintain the defence system as is, as a minimum. So we're in a situation where we've got a really complicated, really ageing infrastructure that is really valuable and does need to continue to be maintained. But it is really costly. So we need to start thinking about what that future investment is and where we need to focus that investment going forward so that we can continue to have a landscape that delivers for the people that live within it. So some of the challenges that I feel from sitting in an operational space, so some of the challenges for responding to the Peatland agenda is this landscape is absolutely at the forefront of climate change, so we are not only dealing with the challenges of flood risk management, we've also got the challenges of sea level rise, and we've got the challenges of drought. So all three of those are in this landscape at the same time. We've got an entire asset management system which has been set up and for over 500 years that is to take the water out. All of the system is to drain. It is entirely set up to do that. We've got a funding and policy mechanism which drives investment in assets which protect people and property primarily, which makes it difficult for us to divert investment to other outcomes. And we have got a managed system, so it is managed. It is not not a natural system, and it will need to continue to be managed in the future. No matter what this landscape is, there will need to be a level of asset management in the system, because otherwise there is no landscape. We're talking permanent inundation. I don't think anybody in this room is sitting in a place where that is the outcome that we want to be looking towards. And we've got legislation which encourages drainage rather than water level management. So most of the legislation which exists, particularly for IDBs, is about driving towards drainage. It's not driving towards water level management. And I think the other one that I really am, I don't know if struggling is quite the right word, is that sitting in we've got multiple pressures on this landscape. So we've obviously got the challenge from the peat restoration agenda and the carbon net zero agenda. We've also got major housing requirements. We've recently had a new direction from Michael Gove for 200,000 new houses in Cambridge. We've got transport requirements, we've got growth requirements, and of course we've got the food production requirements. So we've got lots and lots of pressures on this single landscape, which are all being managed through this really complicated system. So one of the things that we are doing within the Environment Agency is trying to really try and take a step back and think about what those future investments needs might need to be. We've always previously sort of taken an approach to asset management where we've focused our investment on a single asset. So as an asset comes to the end of its life, we would tend to then go in and think about that asset and think about whether we need to invest in it or not. That's not going to work given the scale of the challenges that we've got into the future. We've got to move to a much more system-based and catchment-based approach, really thinking about what the best priority for investment is across this landscape, where we need to focus that investment and what we're trying to deliver with that investment. So really, what is the landscape of defence going to look like in the future with climate change, with the policy agendas that we've got, and then what does that mean for flood risk management investment into the future. So we have started a new programme of work called FEMS 2100 Plus, and it is about really trying to get that clarity on the future asset investment journey. So it's a joint partnership project between ourselves and IDBs, so all the IDBs across FENS, and we are aiming to do three things. So we are aiming to give real clarity on what the scale of investment that is needed in flood risk management across this landscape. So really trying to explore what the overarching case for investment is across the landscape and what the future investment journey would be. We are aiming to give more clarity to our future Environment Agency capital pipeline, so that's a bit of an Environment Agency speak, but essentially we need to really know what capital investments we need to be making over the next 15 to 20 years, so that we know that we are putting that right investment in the right place. And we really want the confidence that that investment that we are making is in the right place. So is it really investing in the asset management that will deliver long-term climate adaptation and will also enable delivery of the landscape that is desired by those who live and work within it. I very much see that my space is not deciding what happens with this landscape. My space is to enable that landscape for those that live and work within it, and that we deliver the societal benefits that we want from this landscape. So we need to understand what those are and then explore what that means for the investment that we're going to make. Just to give you a little picture of what we class, and that's really not showing up very well. So we are right down here. So this is what we class as the FENS within FENS 2100. So it is going right up through the Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire FENS. And I will probably very quickly, so the three products that we're looking at producing. So we are looking at developing a landscape scale investment framework. So really trying to get consistent decisions on what future investment, how we will make those future investment decisions. We will then be producing at a catchment scale asset investment plans. So translating that down to those five catchments and determining what the short to medium term investment is. And what we're also going to be doing is providing a much better evidence base as to what flood risk management assets we have in this landscape and the costs and the benefits of those assets, so that we can build that future picture for investment. So I'll stop there, but I guess I just wanted to give you a picture of where I'm coming from in this landscape and the challenges that we are dealing with in a landscape which is so underpinned by its management and its investment, and hopefully giving you that flavour that the peatland and the restoration agenda has got to fit within this much wider picture of asset management investment and all of the other outputs and value that this landscape brings, and it's how we balance all of that is really, really difficult. And so it's been really valuable to hear all of the challenges and all of the ideas that I've heard about peat restoration, and it's trying to understand how we balance those pictures and how we balance that agenda within this much wider asset management challenge that we've got across this landscape. So, pass over. Emma.
Brilliant, thank you, Amy. I think you can pick up from what Amy has just said. We're throwing something else into the mix of a complicated, or often very complicated landscapes. One of the biggest challenges for delivering the Lowland peat agricultural agenda, so raising those water tables in these complex landscapes, is the lack of evidence base. So alongside DEFRA's Peat 3 Commission, as well as ADA's grant for IDB infrastructure, the EA have a £1 million R&D fund to try and address some of those water environment questions. So the R&D piece of work has 5 themes. So water resources, that balance on water demand, water management. We're going to be asking different questions of those assets and infrastructure that they've done before. So what do we need? It's evidence around that. Evidence around the feasibility. Peat in Lowland agricultural peat isn't pure, lovely peat that hasn't been messed with. It's been farmed by definition. So yeah, what's the feasibility? We've raised that water table on there. What's your cropping going to look like? All those sort of questions around that. Where's the space for nature-based solutions? So where can green solutions come in? And theme 5, regulatory framework as well. This morning I been in an Upland Lowland workshop. Where did they cross over and where possibly not? And one of the feedback from the innovation theme was talking about the frustration, and it was Natural England that came up. And it made me think that maybe that was feedback from those used to restoring blanket fog, and maybe those in the Lowlands hadn't come across the Environment Agency. You know, so let's mention this. Our permitting system. If you're going to raise the water table, the key permits you'll probably come across are what's called FRAP, or Flood Risk Activity Permit. So anywhere near a flood zone, you're going to need to get a flood risk activity permit. The next 3, impoundment licence or abstraction or transfer licence, are called water resources permits, and they're permits around balancing water demand. So these are, you want to abstract water to top your water table up in summer when it dries out. You're going to have to balance that need with other water users. We all like to drink drinking water, that comes into it, but other business uses, so yeah, other spray irrigation and that sort of thing. And then we're going to be asking another question of that. So yeah, our water resources permit's about balancing all those water needs as well as leaving enough water in the river for biodiversity as well. And there are other things that come into it, such as the Reservoir Act, if we wanted to impound water at a big enough scale. So just a bit of a demographic, because it's not just EA permits when talking about water as well. You've got your local authority or your IDBs as well, if you're on the minor rivers. And also coming in kind of from the side, if you need a planning permission and there is an aspect of flood risk, the EA are probably going to be consulted on that at some point. So it's not an in-depth look at EA permitting, it's just a mention of what's there. And we're an evidence-based organisation, so the evidence that we're going to be collecting is going to help inform this going forward. So this is mainly because the slide, you should get slides at some point. So there's lots of links there to take you to the right part of gov.uk, so if you're really interested in read around. But if we do encourage pre-app advice, the flood risk and water resources Act are two separate systems, two separate pre-app advice routes. And if you've got a site and you're thinking really specifically about the site, do take a look at the water discovery pilot as well. So, any questions on any of that? Yes.
So your current, I want to know how dynamic your infrastructure is at the moment. So there was a bit on there about water transfer a minute ago, but you know, some people in this landscape want loads of water irrigation, some people want to re-wet their peat and that sort of thing, some people want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Is the system designed, does it work in, you know, what are the log jams as you go through the system? And as you redesign it into the future, are you going to, you know, how would you redesign it, the architecture of it internally, that you can move things around to the places that need it most? Is it designed like that at the moment? Could it do that at the moment? Or is it like all transfer out of the system? Could you transfer within the system?
You can, I mean, but it's complicated and you've got a number of different owners that are doing, so it's not all owned by the same person, so you can't rejig. It doesn't work as a whole system, it works individually. So the IDBs will make their own decisions on their approach, which will then pump into the EA main river, and we will then make a decision. And our riparian owners will pump into the IDB system. So it doesn't work as a single system. So if you're tweaking individual bits of the system, that's quite difficult because it doesn't. It's probably, I would say, not dynamic enough to work like that at the moment. So
as you renew it, would you build that sort of capacity into it? If you're renewing it?
If that's what we as those that live and work here, if that's what we want to do with the system, then that's what we can then look at what the future investment approach is. And I think going into the future, we will need to look at a system which is much more integrated in terms of water management. So bringing in linking much more the drought issue up with the flood risk issue. You know, at the moment they're managed separately, which just doesn't seem sensible. You know, so making the system work much better, making the links between the investment that the IDBs are making, the investment we're making, the Environment Agency, and making a more flexible system. But that is complicated and will take a long time and we need to be making joint decisions together, which is exactly what we're trying to do. But I would say at the moment it doesn't work in that way.
So you will co-design it with everybody?
Yeah, just backing that up a bit. I was asked on a farm visit yesterday, why aren't we holding water levels up in the winter time? Well, you know, that might work for parts of my farm, growing crops, but my neighbours, they want their land drained. So it's such an interlinked system that the drainage has to be dropped in the winter months. And then if we're holding the levels up in the summer underneath the crops, and we get a rain event, we need to be having maximum capacity pumping that water back into the river system. So it's a very, very complicated
It's
situation.
very complicated, yeah, and there's not necessarily all the knowledge as well, which is a bit of an issue, I would say. I think it's being held individually, so absolutely farmers know their own system really, really well, but as a whole, I'm not sure at the moment, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have a full picture of really how the system is interlinking itself and how the decision-making on this, how it might interact with the wider system. So it does make it difficult for us to make decisions sometimes on what we do with elements of that system, because it's not connected necessarily.
And that's one of the aspects that we're trying to address with some this grant scheme that we've got live at the moment, the water discovery pilot, and also with the R&D to try and tease out some of that detail, so that we've got a better understanding. But it quite often will be very site specific, so it's a really complex thing to get at.
And excuse the pun, but it's just a drop in the ocean as well.
Yeah.
It's a tiny amount.
Yeah.
Yeah, just carry on with what Martin was saying. If you look at the history of the drainage of the fens, there's been a tendency towards ever larger units. So bringing together lots of small units together to have one single massive pump. You all used to be winter pumps, now it's diesel or electric, whatever it is. But increasing the power of individual pumps and making them drain much bigger area. Part of the problem that you have about controlling water levels is that everybody is joined up to everybody else. So your neighbour might not want what you want, and you can't actually get away from your neighbour, so you've got to do some sort of compromise. I just wonder if there's a sort of any possibility that policy might go back in the direction, instead of joining everything up into ever larger units, is to try to bring it down and segment it into smaller units, each of which could be subject to a smaller pump or drainage regime of its own, and therefore separate from its neighbours. Because I think the same is true with agriculture, really, towards larger fields and bigger this and bigger that. And maybe the time has come to start sort of going the other way now, having smaller units.
I think whatever there will be, as I said, I think there will need to be a level of management and a level of water management, whatever. It's trying to work out how we can, what the best approach to management is, and I do wonder if that, I think that's, everything's going to have to be on the table in this landscape, to be honest.
I was just wondering, how much kind of cross-pollination do you have with your colleagues on the Somerset levels? Because that's where I kind of am based, and it's not the same, but it's similar. And like one thing that's been in place on the levels for a while is these kind of raised water level areas where there's localised infrastructure that means certain areas can hold more water, and they're not all working for their purpose, but it's kind of different thinking. And I was just wondering if there is, like between the EA and Somerset and
we do engage with our colleagues, probably not enough, but
I think it's the same questions all being raised about what we can do going forwards with all this, people living over there.
Yeah,
need to stop the water getting that way, but we want some water over there, we don't want it over there, but we do want it in that little corner, but not in that little corner.
Yeah. I mean, there's a similar, there's a lot of linkage up within the Environment Agency on similar geography types.
Just because I haven't heard of a project like the Fen 2100, I haven't heard of something like that in Somerset.
No, there isn't anything like that.
Just tell them to,
And the work around the Lowland agricultural peak that we're doing is all England-wide, so we'll cover. Lancashire is different to Somerset.
You mentioned earlier that you need to see how the peatlands will fit into the fence 2100 plus. Do you see them as a potential asset to help you manage that water, or just how do they fit in?
I think I'm going to sound.
Sorry if I'm putting you on
No. it's often talked that raising water levels will improve flood risk management. I'm not convinced that it will do that. I think it has a role to play in, it's definitely a value to, in terms of carbon, but in terms of protecting people and property, and in terms of delivering it, in terms of the flood risk management that we talk about, I'm personally not, well, I haven't seen the evidence to show that in this landscape, where actually it is an incredibly slow moving system, we don't generally need to slow down water. Storage, it might make a difference, but I think again, this is something we'd like to know more about, is actually what the peat restoration agenda might deliver in terms of reducing flood risk. And being honest, I'm not convinced that there is that direct link at the moment, which does make it difficult again in terms of that sort of funding space, because we are limited in terms of our funding directed towards, it's got to reduce flooding to people and property, and I'm not sure that link is.
So how could we, from the perspective of looking at peat restoration and landowners who wish to continue farming and want to prepare to raise water levels and can be managed on a secure hydrological unit, how can we help to find the evidence or to put forward cases to explore ideas?
I guess, I mean, this is exactly what we're coming and asking for. I very much would like to see us in that space where we're enabling it, but it does require us to be able to fit it within the rules of the game that we are working within, and that means having the right evidence that does underpin it. So being able to demonstrate that it does fit within our Treasury funding rules, that it does deliver our outcomes, that it is potentially reducing flood risk to people and property. I don't know if that is even possible, that you can demonstrate that, but if you start to talk in those sort of terms, then it starts to fit more into this agenda. But it's quite difficult, being totally honest, in this room at the moment to join those two up.
But you need to, so
yeah.
You need to change the remit.
Well, that's the other side. Yeah.
Like a secondary remit,
But there is, I mean, for the Environment Agency, there are all the other multiple benefits that we can get from, sort of wise use of peatlands, soils and, restoration. So, it's thinking about the water resources. So there can be benefits for water resources, although obviously Lowland is more of a problem. In the uplands it can actually be really good, because it sort of they act as sort of a sponge and hold the water and release it slowly. So there's benefits there. It's looking at what other opportunities and benefits there are, water quality, biodiversity, all of those really important multiple benefits that peatlands can give us. We've got to really think about those as well, and if we can pull those out and identify those, then that gives us much more of a hook, as it were, to get funding and be able to take things forward. So that's our role as the Environment Agency, is to make sure that we understand that water management, what the risks are, because there are risks with anything that we do, because it's a change. So we've got to be really aware of those, but also what opportunities and benefits we can get from that. If we can make that clear and let everybody understand that, and go into these situations with their eyes open. So we're not just going, oh yeah, that's fine, we'll just crack on and do it, and then suddenly 5 years down the line go, ooh, I hadn't thought about that one. Some knock-on impact or implication. So it's just at the moment trying to tease out all of that, and that's one of the reasons for having this workshop today, is to get people's ideas and try and get a lot more down on paper.
Yeah, Laurie spoke about having smaller units. Now, the smaller units would be possible if we had our own reservoirs on the farm. So if we had our reservoirs, so we could control our own water source and not be held by our neighbours, then that might be a potential answer. But obviously we need funding for that.
Yeah.
question or comment, I guess, is linked to Victor Jude's book. So we know you've got a complex set of issues here, but I guess the vision and looking at the right thing in the right place, are you considering other water issues, so water quality, thinking of fish passage, things like that? So obviously, when you're thinking about how you manage water, it's not just about a resource in terms of stopping flooding or like resilience to drought. There's also water quality and the other things that we use our water, like is that being considered like
it is.
Is it already multiple things you have to consider?
It is, and I mean, you know, as the Environment Agency, we obviously have a much wider remit in terms of water resources and, you know, biodiversity. So we will very much be looking at the future investment, and we're trying to move it into this much more integrated water management approach. So we have a wider piece of work that's happening within the Fens called the Future Fens Integrated Adaptation Task Force. A mouthful, but that's a joint initiative between ourselves, Anglian Water, Water Resources East and the local authorities, and that is looking at how we can jointly manage water as a whole across this landscape, because it is a landscape where water is absolutely the underpinning. We talked about it as water as the engine of this landscape. You know, this is a landscape where actually, if you don't sort out the water issue, whether it's too much, not enough, or too salty or too fresh, actually there's no point in really worrying about wider investment. You know, you can't, if you haven't got the water management right, actually the rest of it, you know, it doesn't really matter. You need to get the water is so key in this landscape because of the management. So we do need to think about it as a whole. We're doing things like, so there's a couple of brand new reservoirs that are coming into East Anglia in the Fens, and we are working very closely with Anglian Water to see how we can link up with them and how we can build on those. But it is really complicated. You know, whenever within flood risk management, we always try and drive, you know, the natural flood management agenda, and try and drive solutions which deliver multiple benefits. But fundamentally, we've also got a role to, you know, enable this landscape to be a landscape that
assume that internally you're linked up with whether colleagues get not
we work and that's the value of having. So my project and my team's new within the Environment Agency, and we've been brought in to have the space to think about this as a whole place-based approach, which is quite unusual. And so it's given us the time and space and the funding and the people to really think about this as a whole problem, which is good.
So I'm just conscious of time, and oh, is there? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
A few questions. Mentioned Somerset. What about other European counterparts like Holland, for example? I'm guessing that you've been in close contact with them already. And then just listening, I just wanted to see how open you are to change in the landscape. Because there's a fear of change, but as you know, the landscape has changed quite radically. I mean, it's like, how do you hope to explore that?
Yeah.
And just a comment I heard yesterday was how how community archaeology can help people look at how the landscape has changed and how change isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we wouldn't be here now, would we, if it hadn't changed?
I think I'm personally open to looking at change, and I think that's where I'm trying to sit in that space where I'm not the decision maker, that we are, what we want to do is sort of facilitate and make clear what the investment choices are, but we really need to understand actually what the ambition for change and the future ambition for this landscape is, and that's some of the work that we're going to do jointly with the Future Friends Integrated Adaptation, is try and really get this picture of what in reality is the future of this landscape. Actually, what might climate change mean? Things start to become technically infeasible, when things might need to become financially infeasible, because actually the level of maintenance is so expensive that we just can't continue to do it. When might that hit? So we're starting to starting to really build up that evidence for actually when would that change need to happen, and then working with you know, the partners and the businesses across this landscape to understand what change might be possible, how could we facilitate and support that change, what else might we need to, how might we need to work with government to enable mechanisms to bring, you know, because we will want to, I think change will be inevitable, it's going to have to be, because even if we build the best investment case in the world, actually it might be technically infeasible in some of these locations, given the change, the level of sea level rise or the level of, you know, we will possibly get to a tipping point, but we need to understand when, what that might mean, and then how can we support the businesses within there to amend. But that all of that has a big piece of work, and that's what we're trying to do, because what we don't want to do is get to a point where that change is forced upon us without us being able to support properly, you know, and invest in it. So we know that it will take time. You know, we're in a system which has been like this for 400 or 500 years. You know, if we're moving, it's going to take time. So we need to know whether things need to change in 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, 50 years, you know, and then start to move towards that and start to support the businesses that are within there if they do need to change to make that change.
Okay, so we'll go around the groups and feedback. So when it comes to your group, if you can say what the issue or constraints were that you discussed, and then just give us a few pointers about the detail behind. So should we start at the back? Who's feeding back from that group? And were you doing funding?
Yeah, we were looking at funding.
Oh, I was doing it, brilliant.
Yeah, you guys not sick of my voice this week yet. We were looking at funding, talking about hydrology and funding for reservoirs. We talked about funding through a grant scheme, and we talked about some of the limitations of grant schemes, such as difficulty in applications, typical length of time you get to apply, the short term of funding, and the fact that the grant is in arrears as well, particularly reservoirs cost a lot, with obviously the example from yesterday of it being about £1 million to put a reservoir in. And right at the end we came up with potentially looking at it a different way and paying for flood storage. The two are slightly different, but kind of an innovative way of looking at it. But also alternative options to your classic small reservoir, such as widening drains to store with purpose for storing more water. We also talked about private finance, carbon credits, stacking, BNG, and cost of carbon units is really poor. Poor for you up on blanket bog, so really translate very well to Lowland. Talked about stacking with BNG. It's not really much of a feature for this area at the moment. Potentially maybe a rolling annual scheme that will look a bit more like the soil credit system that's available at the moment. And recognition of peatland soil as a habitat, so then you start to score better under BNG. And talking about climate change and things like that. Like renaming, changing those units and things like that. Straight into policy.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a bit of struggle. So thank you very much. So districted funding. Do you want policy, sorry.
So we looked at two issues. We looked at IDPs and climate change policy. So IDPs, the main issues are that they're there to drain and get rid of water ASAP. It's mainly farmers on their boards, so they can have a little bit of a different vision. They're costly, they do cost landowners. Different IDBs groups are in different areas are inconsistent. So there could be potentially a conflict between drainage and people who want to restore and keep water levels higher. So the best outcome is if they sat around the table, worked on a level playing field, and maybe thought about being water level managers rather than drainage only. So that's more or less things. Yeah. And then with climate change policies, you will ask, does it fit the purpose and does it address reality? So one of the comments was that the government seems to be unpicking the policies that they've been put forward and putting dates back, like biodiversity net gain example back. Too much uncertainty, certainly not enough financial incentive, and it feels like the general populace feels that the target's actually unrealistic, and that the big target of 2050 is just not going to be attained. People know that, feel that already, so maybe we should have smaller interim targets to try and achieve the smaller bite-sized pieces. And that's
great, thank you. So then over to the water management group.
Yeah, thank you. So with water management regime approach, there was several that we were handed over, notes that were handed over, and these looked at this, addressing it with smaller segmented units, increase automation of the pumps, variable pumps, and automation of the monitoring. What we actually ended up focus, and there's also the data collection elements as well that could be improved. What we ended up focusing on was, first of all, how do we protect the area from inundation from the sea, because otherwise there's not going to be anything left to manage the water. So a new sluice upstream of Denver sluice to create a new integrated system. So then you can start to look at the actual water management itself. For that, once that's been done, then you look at a mosaic approach that looks at food production, peat wetlands, different, different uses of a multifunctional landscape. There also needs to be a landscape scale approach, a hydrological unit scale. It needs to be measured in a way that's holistic, sort of natural capital, resilient community, that kind of holistic approach. The IDB needs to change its remit to Water Management Board, and then there needs to be a huge amount of education and community engagement with anyone who is connected with the landscape, and that includes urban areas upstream of this area that are likely to impact. So, because let's face it, the taxes, there's going to be some kind of, people need to buy into it, literally. So, yeah.
Okay, that's great. So you want to start with
okay, so some of the knowledge gaps that we've identified is what would be the effect of creating more small reservoirs on farms, would it be possible for that to be funded, how would the availability of water be if it's not a lot of farm reservoirs, and our abstraction license is fit to purpose, and impoundment license. Another one was, how responsive are our assets to flood and drought, and are they fit for purpose for the future, and can we make them more so? The effect of large-scale housing on lowland agricultural fleet on water availability. Is the possibility of developing relationships with large builders to build in flood benefits and storage as a result of building houses and developing connections wider rather within the greater development of the different stakeholders on the land. Re-wetting, will it protect against flooding or not? That's a good question. And would it be possible to actually find an optimum water level for winter holding so we can react to flash flooding as well as keeping the water levels there for our dry months? have we thought about stepped or tiered water levels that we're doing in Ireland at the moment? And lastly, studies on how biodiversity will be affected, positive or negative, with rewetting areas of Worthy.
Brilliant, thanks. I think just going back to the thing about the relationship between the builders, the development, I think it was you, Mike, wasn't it, that said that in some places they actually make the quarry material for the building in the area where it will then afterwards provide a focused benefit. So a bit wider thinking around on a catchment scale about they actually tying it directly in, which I thought was quite an interesting idea.
We do, I mean, the Environment Agency does have a statutory planning responsibility, so we do get involved in that level of discussion.
Okay,
But the wider sort of link with housing growth as a whole, so we're trying to work with like local planning authorities and trying to drive that link between housing and development as a whole. Again, this is where the sort of contradiction in policies can come in, where you've got, you know, the local authority has got a housing target and a target, and they'll probably start, you know, and get those. Yeah, it's difficult to balance.
I guess I was just saying about identifying the point in the process where you can share the co-benefits of what you're doing. So something you want might actually help out the housing development kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I'll move on. So, who's feeding back from the group? Oh, thanks, Alan.
Yeah, so just add on to that one, it was great to understand, I think Amy alluded to it in her talk about the hydrological understanding of the fens and the mapping of it. It's all localised scale. We need to have that bigger, on the whole grander unit, understanding what's going on. Almost, it'd be quite handy, you know, having that. So maybe there is one, but not seeing that map as well, like identifying where all the different features and controls are, sort of thing, and how those impact upstream, downstream partners. And then it builds on again into the sharing, for people to share that use of data, because a lot of, again, that data is kept very localised, I think, and needs to go wider, such as local weather data. What's the water resource situation? So again, it was touching upon not just exactly the same way as what the guy said, in terms of what we need for to sustain the fens and future populations. A standardised approach to modelling, in terms of, you get a lot of, so that was regarding the hydrology, if you like. So we've gone through different projects and different companies all take a different approach to come up with various outcomes. So almost a standardised approach would be beneficial. Equipment, again, similar to what was mentioned in the previous group, and exploring the use of renewable tech, such as the Netherlands constantly deploy at the moment. Understanding historic hydrology of the fens using paleoecology. Increased, again, touching on the expansion of nutrient neutrality, which the future looks very uncertain of, but actually is there a possibility of that having a bigger role in benefiting the fens? Water quality impacts or changes to water level management. So that how does the change in management affect the water quality? And the final one was impact of water level change on flood risk in the fens and other lowland areas. So again, just touching on that modelling really.
So we're going to have to move swiftly on to this group. So if you've got different things, could you feed those back? But if you overlap, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I can't remember what you said.
So I'll just very quickly, soil hydrological function. So
yeah,
need to map the soils, analysis of local communities and local economy. Gap analysis of different infrastructures that might be impacted, i.e. what other assets and their assets and their land drainage rights, so impacts on roads, rail, those kind of things. Understand the balance of methane, GHG, greenhouse gases if you're wetting, so Understand what the ideal management, asset management system might look like, so it's more adaptive and resilient. What are the future pollution risks? So if you're raising the water levels, you might suddenly find that lots of cesspits are suddenly going to be now polluting. So nutrient neutrality is actually going to be on a much bigger scale that we've not even thought about. And other pollution issues and health issues. Analysis of gaps, conflicts, synchronicities and opportunities between different policies at national and local scales. So that could be regarding food, water, climate change, water, energy, housing, etc. And then water storage at different granularities, from farm reservoirs down to local. It could be a rainwater garden in front of each new house or something like that.
Okay.
Wow, I'm just trying to take off the notes.
Yeah, can I collect your sheets, please, at the end? Thank you. Okay, I'll just get the folders back.
Well, I think it would just be just for me to say thank you for all your input, your enthusiasm and your thoughts. You've given us a lot to think about and work through. If there are any thoughts that you have after this time and you want to get in touch, either myself or Amy or any of the team, the email addresses will be in all the conference information. So just drop us a line. We're very happy to strike up the conversation. Yeah, I think it just shows the complexity. I think that's all I can say, really. There is a lot for us to try and tease out and try and work through. So, but it's been really useful, really helpful, and I've really enjoyed the last few days as well, talking to many of you, finding out some of the issues that you're facing. So, yeah, thank you. It's time for tea now, I think, and then it's 3:15 in the main hall. Oh yeah, can I bring curtains back, please? Thank you. Thank you.